This is, how do we stop putting fossil fuel garbage into the atmosphere? You know, that's what we're all about. When we get right down to it, that's what we're all about. And the faster we can do that, the better. There is an urgency to this, and it is also, I believe, the great moral question of our time that we all have to understand. It has that dimension very deeply. We have two panelists with us today who are deeply engaged in this issue. Ellen Dorsey has a long history of activism. She was with Amnesty International, the Heinz Foundation, the Rachel Carson Conservation Trust, and now heads the Global Wallace Fund. Thomas Van Dyke was started As You Sow, is a financial advisor, was involved with Divest, as I remember, probably 6 or 8 years ago, long before a lot of people even thought that was more than a skin disease. So thank you very much. Thanks. Let me start by giving you just a brief primer on one part of this. Almost every major intellectual institution in the country, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Chicago, Duke, Stanford, and so on, will say that they are doing, and they are, significant work in research and teaching related to climate change. And it's a very impressive agenda if you go out and look at what they're doing. But that's not the full story. The rest of what they're doing is investing very, very significant endowments. And how are they dealing with those endowments? Those endowments have the same values that the universities do in teaching and research. And the answer to that is, unfortunately, for the most part, a resounding no. These universities continue to invest their scarce resources in helping the fossil fuel community, the very community that caused the problem to begin with. We have a strong group of very, very senior alumni working at Harvard. Includes Bill McKibben and Gina McCarthy and Stephen Heinz and a variety of other, I'd say, pretty heavy and respectable and well-known people within the Harvard community, banging on the university and saying, you have to reconcile what you are doing in teaching and research with the way in which you are managing your very significant, almost $40 billion endowment. To which the answer is twofold. Well, we would rather engage with the fossil fuel community, and we don't want to demonize the fossil fuel community. In other words, we want to participate with and assist the fossil fuel community, and we don't want to demonize the people that caused the problem to start with. Now, it's a huge cultural problem for a Harvard endowment to take on this question. We realize that. But presumably, great institutions are there to lead. Great institutions are there to take on the tough issues. And it's not just Harvard. Yale has the same problem. Princeton has the same problem. Chicago has the same problem. Stanford tried to solve the very problem very nicely by saying, we're going to not have any investments in coal. Well, they didn't have any investments in coal to start with. I mean, it was one of the great con jobs of the world of higher education. If the universities are bad, and I will stop with this and turn it to my colleagues, if the universities are bad, philanthropy is just as bad, if not worse. There's probably only one major foundation besides what Ellen is doing that has divested from fossil fuels, and that's the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. Not the Rockefeller Foundation, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, the next generation down. Ford has not divested and will not do so. MacArthur mocks at the idea of divesting. We don't see any of the big West Coast foundations have divested. And yet these are the same institutions that are spending research and development money on teaching and research on climate change, and yet they continue to be associated with and effectively supporters of the very same fossil fuel community that continues to put that fossil fuel garbage up into the atmosphere. Now, what we do about that, is going to be part of the next discussion. But I wanted to lay out, it is a fascinating issue because it's substantive, it's highly political, and it really goes to the culture that a wonderful Norwegian yesterday who was talking about how do you think about this. He's really talking about, you know, the culture of institutions and the culture of change. How do we make something as deeply important as this change? Okay, so let me do this. I'm going to go to you, okay? All right, Ellen? I can't tell you, Ellen has gotten beaten up one side and down the other, I know, for what she says is pushing on this very issue, and I have just enormous admiration for what she's done. Ellen Dorsey.
Back at you, Senator Worth. What Senator Worth is saying is, if you own fossil fuels, you own climate change, period. If you own fossil fuels in your investment portfolio, you are participating in an industry that has lied about the science, is driving the problem, has bought off politicians, lobbied for inaction by governments, and continue to spread disinformation about what is not a climate change issue. It is a climate emergency. And let's be clear that we have moments, seconds, to turn the ocean liner around and go in a radically different direction to wind down the fossil fuel companies and end the fossil fuel era. Full stop. That's what we must do. And so our foundation started in 2009 with the realization that we couldn't be funding climate activists, and particularly youth activists, with the mere 5% of our investment portfolio and be invested in fossil fuels with the 95%. It was at best inconsistent, if not hypocritical. And so we began a process of unwinding our own investments to get out of fossil fuels and to set targets for investing in climate solutions. Then, that was during the period where we failed to get a global agreement in Copenhagen, and the Senate legislation, Waxman-Markey, that Senator Worth mentioned earlier, collapsed. And it collapsed for the reasons Senator Worth said, and the fact that you had a highly motivated fossil fuel industry that was funding and lobbying to ensure that it either wouldn't pass or it would be so compromised and neutered that we wouldn't want to have it anyhow, quite frankly. So in that context, we had a demoralized environmental community, but we didn't have a climate movement. There was not a full-blown grassroots climate movement. And let's be clear, dramatic systemic change never happens without mass mobilization of people standing up to power and demanding their rights and demanding the government work for them and not for profit or for industry. So in that context emerged some student campaigns on universities calling for initially divestment from coal, and there were 8 campus campaigns that quickly went to 40, and then due to some brilliant analysis by an organization called Carbon Tracker that laid out the notion of stranded asset risk, that we had that the fossil fuel companies had way too many reserves. They couldn't be burned, and so these are risks for the investors that hold these companies. In short, more complex than that. And Bill McKibben connected the divestment idea that was starting to brew on campuses brilliantly with this stranded risk argument and called for full fossil fuel divestment. 40 campaigns went to 400 overnight. I found those early campaigns. We supported the spread of the movement to faith groups, to tackling pension funds, to tackling banks. And then we organized something called Divest, Invest, Philanthropy. We organized ourselves and said, listen, folks, you need to stand up with your portfolios and do the right thing. And if you do that, you'll put wind at the back of the students. You'll create investment portfolios that can be held up to show that this can be done successfully, to divest and invest, and you'll help drive the market for fossil-free products. We hired Tom's firm to work with us, and he's done a fantastic job, and he'll give you all the figures. But in short, we're fully divested. We're about 16% invested in climate solutions, which we can come back to because I want to talk a little bit about where we should be putting those investment dollars. We've beat our benchmarks every year, so much so that we've doubled our grant budget. So it's an ethical imperative, it's financially possible and successful, and it's absolutely crucial that we stand up and say we will not be part of this system anymore. Quick little update on where the movement is. So the movement starts on a few campuses really in 2011, the fall of 2011. In the September 2014, in advance of Ban Ki-moon's climate summit and the First People's climate strike, representatives of the movement from around the world came together to make the first announcement about the strength of the movement in a very short period of time. That the World Council of Churches was divesting, Rockefeller Brothers. We had now about 70 foundations that committed, and there were at that point 52 billion in assets under management that had pledged to some form of fossil fuel divestment. It's now over 9 trillion.
Okay, good job. Tom, is this history about right? Is the vector about right? Tell us.
Well, let's look at, I have a question for the group here. From the standpoint, everyone here have an IRA or 401k or any sort of thing, so you can make investment decisions. So let's look at this chart here to the left. So there's 2 funds. The S&P 500 is the black line, Fund A and Fund B. Fund A beats the benchmark, lower standard deviation. Fund B, less than bond-like returns, high risk. Which fund are you going to put into your 401k plan? No, seriously, which one? Who would put Fund A in their 401k plan? Who would put Fund B in their 401k plan? No value investors here, huh? No, I think it's a value trap. Okay. How many people here have divested from fossil fuels? Raise your hand. Okay. For those of you who haven't, let's look at what Fund B is. Fund B is the XLE, which stands for the energy sector of the S&P 500. Okay? The energy sector of the S&P 500 does not have a single renewable energy company in it. It is 100% oil and gas companies. Worse than bond-like returns, greater than equity-like risk with a 24% standard deviation. Okay? Love that upside capture, 82% with a huge downside capture, over 136%. So you have to ask yourself, if you're looking at this, and Fund A, by the way, is a fully ESG integrated manager that's been fossil fuel free from inception. And this goes all the way back to 2007. Let's look at this energy sector a little closer. Because people say, well, you know, that's a long time frame. This has been all the time frames. The last 5 years, the energy sector, 100% oil and gas companies, the big ones, a little over 8% for the S&P return. The energy sector is a negative over 5. We're like, okay, how's it doing? The recent numbers are really bad. Okay, in fact, if you're looking to short the S&P, you might actually just want to short the energy sector because you're getting more downside movement when the S&P moves down. Take it back over a longer time frame, like talked about market peak, market bottom. The S&P 500, this is total return, not annualized return. 10% total return since the peak in 2007, market peak. Even worse than the financial sector, which I think had a little meltdown. In fact, they melted down the entire market. March 2009 from the bottom all the way to now, the energy sector is by far the worst performing. Look at it against the 512%. The energy sector is up 100. The S&P is up over 400%. So you have to ask yourself, if you're still invested in fossil fuels, and investing is about risk and return, what is inspiring you to underperform? Right? Why is Harvard and all these large endowments still invested in fossil fuels, given that investing is about risk and return? Here, 3 foundations we work with. We're part of the 17 foundations that have divested. Rockefeller's not one of these. Ellen's
First round, 17.
Yeah, the 17 in the first round. We have 5-year numbers for foundations that have divested from fossil fuels and are fully ESG integrated. In other words, using environment, social, and governance factors to mitigate risk and generate outperformance in their portfolios. Portfolio A is someone who's actually here. It's their word, John Powers, Educational Foundation of America. They let me talk about this. Is Portfolio A against their customized benchmark. Significant outperformance. By the way, that 3-year number is actually beat everybody but MIT's as far as endowments go. Harvard, Yale, and others. Portfolio B, you can see significant outperformance. These are net of all fees numbers for endowments that have divested and have integrated. So there's a complete reward for those entities that have done this. Here's the risk for investing in fossil fuels. You hear, there's worth comment, we're here to engage. You know, we can't divest because we need to be there to engage. Well, actually, what you can actually do is you can divest, hold a small portion of stock, $50,000, $10,000, because it's going to drop. And you want to own enough, you have to own at least $2,000 to engage. Engage the company to meet Paris Climate Accord 2-degree world. And if you meet those demands you're making through shareholder engagement, then you can talk about reinvesting. Because why do you want to expose your beneficiaries of California public retirement system or CalSTRS, the state teachers retirement system? Why do you want to expose your beneficiaries to this downside risk when you can still engage with a little bit of money? So divest, engage, and then talk about reinvesting if they meet your needs.
Great. Thank you very much. Let's try again to put this in the context as to what it is we're trying to accomplish, or what we're up against in trying to make these large institutions become part of our overall goal of stopping fossil fuel use and exploration. One, we have to recognize there is a deep culture among the investment people. And for many of these great American institutions, the investment people run the show. Academics, not the president, not the faculty, not the students, but it's the investment people. And the more we can expose exactly this kind of data, and the more we can expose through shaming, and I want to come back to that, the better opportunity we have. It is not a financial risk to divest. I mean, get that out of the table. That is very well understood by just about everybody. It is a challenge to leadership. If we are going to think that those great institutions of this country that we have depended upon intellectually, we've depended upon in terms of moral leadership and political leadership, if they can't understand this challenge and meet this challenge, then where are we as a country? It's almost enough to make you really sad about where we are as a country. And also renew your commitment to go shake them and say, you guys got to get with this, cut it out. Cut this business of, oh, we have to engage. In other words, we have to be their good friend. What for? What have they done? What have they done for us? This is serious. The 50%, $50,000 set aside or whatever, let me tell you a better way of doing that. That is to require that all faculty disclose where the funding comes from for their research.
Here.
That's all you have to do. Where is that money coming? That is a very simple thing. And can universities say, oh no, we shouldn't disclose where our faculty's money coming from? Come on.
Can I add to that? One of the universities where there was I won't name it, where there was a very robust student divestment campaign, some internal emails were leaked, basically the administration saying, we're getting money from ExxonMobil, we're not going to throw that money away, and you just shut these students down. And what I want to say, to back you up, is to say this movement was student-led, just like the climate strikes, just like the call for a Green New Deal, because we failed this generation. And that these universities are refusing to heed the demands of their own students who are saying, in our name, it is our future that is destroyed. We will be cleaning up this apocalypse, or are faced with the apocalypse. Divest in our name, and the universities are refusing. We all belong to we're all alum of universities, I'm sure. We all must be activists now. Your faith group, your university. It is an obligation to be activists now and call for them to divest.
So divesting, absolutely right. Divesting is part of a broader movement, as we were saying. It does not stand by itself. It's part of a broader movement, a very deep one. My hunch is that we're not going to make these institutions change through our senior leadership and intellectual discussions with them and going in and meeting with the trustees and so on. It's only going to happen through a combination of what we can do and the reinforcing that we can give to the direct action of young people. I absolutely believe that without that kind of direct action, we're not going to make progress. And how do we do that? We look, okay, where was direct action before and what did that accomplish? If we look, maybe the most recent important direct action, was during the Vietnam War, in which students changed this country, by direct action and direct organization, and were led and helped by senior people and senior faculty and so on. But it was the students and the young people in their direct action. If you think about what's gone on with LGBT in this country, how rapidly that has happened through direct action. And if we think back in this country 150 years ago or 200 years ago, the greatest direct action of all was obviously the anti-slavery movement. That was direct action of people that ended up in a bloody, terrible way and hasn't been all solved completely yet. But it was a movement. It was a movement. This ultimately, divest, is technical, but ultimately it is also a moral movement. It's a moral movement for what we are doing for the future of the globe and future generations and the young people who themselves are going to be out there in direct action. It's that direct action. We have to shake these people and say, it is time for you, to come and understand what contribution you're making or are not making to the future of this globe. This is a wonderful opportunity. It's a wonderful opportunity, and it's a wonderful point of leverage. And actually, it's also pretty funny when you start to talk to some of these people, because their answers and their responses are so lame. I mean, you don't want to. It's very hard to laugh at the chairman of the Harvard Board of Trustees. I just turned to McKibben, and McKibben loads out about 5 incredibly articulate sentences that go, just very impressive indeed. Question?
Yes.
You said to ask you.
Well, I wanted 2 things, if I may. The first is the invest side is critically important as well. And that I don't need to say that to this crowd, because you understand that's about investing in renewables. And the movement has increasingly adopted a call for all investors to put at least 5% of their investments into climate solutions, because we do need to scale the climate solutions. But that's not what I'm going to say. I think we as a community have to be absolutely smart and understand that it's not just about investing in large-scale renewables. That particularly for philanthropic or mission-driven investors, we have a responsibility to make sure that as the energy transition unfolds, we leave no one behind. That we need to be investing in Native American communities. We're working on a project of a wind farm at Standing Rock to provide economic opportunities, which is energy justice. There are 1 billion plus people in the world without access to electricity. That's a human rights issue. And we now can leapfrog fossil fuel development and reach these people with distributed renewable energy. There's a campaign called Shine for investors to join in to work on that. And we have to invest in extractive communities with grants, with investment capital. We have to provide economic opportunity for those remaining workers and communities dependent on fossil fuels. So I think it's crucial that we think about what we're investing in and not just large-scale renewables.
I completely agree. The idea of invest is critical. And for the disruption capabilities, I want to just say the experts are generally wrong about what they predict. Like, for example, there's a slide, if you guys just go to the quick slide that can do this really quickly. McKinsey and AT&T, how many cell phones did they say would be available in 2000? 900,000. The actual number was 109 million. They were off by a factor of 120%. Okay, think about that. Eastman Kodak, remember them? They used to be a Dow Jones Industrial Company for a long, long time. Okay? Then digital cameras came in. They knew about the digital technology. Then the smartphone came in. 9 years. Multi-billion-dollar company down to a much smaller company based in Rochester, New York. Look what happened to General Electric when Amy and Howard Levin's ideas of energy efficiency perpetrate. They overestimated the turbines, and their stock has been crushed versus the S&P 500 just in the last 3 years. This disruption is going to go on.
Great.
Okay, again and again. And so the fact is, solar, wind, and energy storage are dropping very, very quickly, 90 to 80%. This is the solution. This is where the disruption is going to come from, and it's going to happen much quicker than what you anticipate.
Let me close with one story that's directly relevant to what's going on here in the state of Colorado. Yesterday there was discussion about the governor's activities. Colorado in the Northeast looks like, if you look at an infrared map of the state of Colorado, it looks like a pincushion. The amount of fracking that's there and is growing into neighborhoods and so on has been a major issue, and local communities have not been able to react to that under the law. And fortunately, there's a new governor, Governor Polis, who's got the bit between his teeth about being able to take this on. There's a new oil and gas commission, and the state legislature has written a whole new set of rules has written a whole new legislation, which now is being put into a set of rules. So where we are today is that the governor and the new commission, which is forging rules, are going to come out by the end of the year with some very interesting and tight rules related to health, particularly endocrine disruptors, the impact of methane on the health of pregnant women, young children, which is the data is devastating on this now as to what happens when people are exposed, and the data is coming in fast and furiously. All of this is being developed on the one hand, and bless his heart, the governor's doing his best. Mounted on the other side is going to be, and already, a vicious campaign from the fossil fuel industry. Day before yesterday in northeastern Colorado were a number of trucks with great big signs on the side saying, recall Polis. Wow. And do you suppose those farmers were putting those signs on the side of the trucks and says no? This is the beginning of what's going to be an incredibly nasty campaign to deny what's going on in terms of the health, to refuse the rationality of a set of rules that have come from an elected body, the state legislature, and come from the elected governor, Governor Polis, are going after them and trying to change that. We'll be trying to throw fear of God into job work. Oh, this is going to be a huge loss of jobs. You know, we're going to destroy the American way of life, and by the way, increase lower back pain in the process. You know, everything that is bad is going to happen as a result of these activities. That is coming for sure from the industry, and we are going to see a battle royal between, I would say, almost the forces of the good guys and the evil, which is dug in in a heavy way and after survival. If Colorado can pull this off and do this as well as it possibly can, this is going to be a model for the country we can all be very proud of. And I can say that you were here right at the aborting. It was very important, and we can win this thing. So thank you all very much for coming.